I have the great privilege of traveling around the country giving talks on my favorite writer. And while the talks are never very interesting, the question and answers that follow the talks are always fascinating, always very lively and very interesting. In fact, they're the only thing I ever look forward to. But don't get your hopes up, because there's not going to be a question and answer session after this talk tonight. However, on Saturday, during the breakout sessions, I will have an entire breakout session for Q&A, and anybody who wants to come and ask me questions can do that. However, there'll be 3 other sessions that you can go to that are much better. But I think even 4. I think we even have 4 better choices. Yeah, we have 4 better choices than the Q&A. But at any rate, the great thing about the Q&A after my talks is that I never know what's going to happen. I never know what topic will come up, and that's what makes it so interesting. However, there are always 3 questions that I do expect and that are inevitably asked at every talk I give, it seems. The first question is, how is Chesterton Academy going? People ask about the school that I helped get started just over 5 years ago in Minneapolis. And the second question that people ask is, can you explain distributism? And then there's a third question, and I'll probably mention that third question sometime before the end of this talk. But I can say for now that it's a Catholic question. All right? But it's pretty obvious from the first 2 questions that education and economics are topics that are on everyone's mind, especially these days. And that's because they seem to be connected to everything else. Hence the theme of this year's conference, and coincidentally, the theme of my talk. The 3 E's: education, economics, and everything else. Let's start with education. Now, I'm not going to begin by rattling off a lot of grim statistics to prove how bad the state of education is today, because it's like what Chesterton says about original sin. He says it's the only Christian doctrine you can prove. All you have to do is look around. Our messed up world is really a direct result of public education, because the vast majority of us are the result of that education. We are the product of that education. The vast majority of our population has been processed through that system. That is the compulsory state-sponsored elementary and secondary schools. The vast majority of our children are in those public schools right now. So it's safe to say that public education has a direct impact on the way that most people think. It forms their minds and fills their minds at the most critical point of development of their minds. And the fact that the teaching of religion is officially prohibited in public education means, by definition, that children are getting an incomplete education. But religion's not merely prohibited in the public schools. The public schools have become openly hostile to Christianity, certainly to morality, such as the Christian teaching on love and marriage. And it's not just that everything taught in our schools is separated from religion, it's also separated from everything else that is taught in our public schools. Every subject is taught discreetly without any connection to anything else that's taught. So we don't teach complete thinking, we just teach fragmented thoughts. And we don't teach the wholeness of things, especially the wholeness of truth. And most of the private schools are no better. They simply use the same system, the same fragmented, compartmentalized approach to education as the public schools do. And the religious schools and even the Catholic schools do the same thing. They simply add another separate fragment that is a religion class. Religion is simply one more subject taught among many, all of them separated from the others. We don't teach the whole truth of things, and the result of this broken, fragmented, incomplete education is a broken world, a broken society, broken families, broken babies, broken lives. Just look around. Because we do not teach the truth, we cannot really even call it education. The definition of education, says Chesterton, is truth in the state of transmission. It's passing the truth from one generation to the next. But if we cannot say what truth is, if we cannot even agree on what truth is, well, then how can we possibly teach it to our children? It's a system designed to fail. We don't teach the old things. We instead teach the trends and the fads and the fashions and the very latest. But the latest only means the last. So in other words, we teach what is last, but we don't teach what is first. We don't teach any of the primary things, any of the elemental things. Which is why Chesterton says that children in school today are subjected to educational philosophies that are younger than they are. America demonstrates over and over again that it has a hatred of the past, its own past as much as anybody else's. American public education demonstrates a hatred of Western civilization's past. We don't teach the classics. We don't teach the great literature, the great ideas. We don't teach reason. And of course we don't teach faith, and so we don't teach how faith and reason go together. We don't understand how the Greek and Roman philosophers met the Hebrew God and how everything collided around the cross in Jerusalem about 2,000 years ago, and how everything that happened since is directly connected to that moment. It's a historical event with immense spiritual implications that cannot be ignored, and yet it is ignored. Now here is a Chesterton quote that you haven't heard. It was an inscription in a book. And he writes in this inscription, it was a winner of a prize for English literature. And the prize was in the name of Chesterton, and so he wrote to the winner of this English prize bearing my name. There is no such thing as secular education, though there may be something like secular instruction. That which is not spiritual is not educational. So why is it important to give your children a complete education, which means, as Chesterton says, it must be spiritual? Why is it important to be a complete thinker? Well, the answer comes from GK Chesterton in another quote that you've never heard, because it's from an Uncollected magazine article that I discovered just 2 weeks ago. Religion is a battle, and to have your thinking unfinished is to be fighting unprepared. If there is an enemy in the field, he will not wait until we find truth. He will already be leading us into error. That's so good, I'm going to read it again. Religion is a battle, and to have your thinking unfinished is to be fighting unprepared. If there is an enemy in the field, he will not wait until we find truth. He will already be leading us into error. And that's exactly what's going on. We have an enemy, and the enemy's not the educational system. The enemy's the devil. And he's always leading men to error, and we are fighting unprepared because we are not complete thinkers. Now at Chesterton Academy, we're trying to teach that complete thinking, and we not only have our subjects connected to one central idea, to one central truth, which is the incarnation, but we have an integrated approach so that all the subjects are connected to each other too, because faith and reason must be connected, but so must math and philosophy be connected, because they're both about logic and clear thinking. And art and science are connected because they both involve observation and the understanding of the beauty of God's creation and the understanding of proportion. And literature and history are connected because they're both telling a story, and it's the same story. And they all, of course, are connected to the Incarnation. We start our day with Mass. We start our day celebrating the Incarnation. And that informs everything else that we teach and do in the school. We also, the arts are very important. We're one of the only schools that has 4 years of philosophy, but also 4 years required of drawing and painting, and 4 years of choir, and 3 years of drama. So they're all in 3 plays, so they learn how to stand up and proclaim the truth. And the main point that really separates us from other schools is that we are accountable to the parents. One of the main problems with state-mandated, state-sponsored, state-run schools is that the state is not accountable to parents. On the contrary, they've made the parents accountable to the state. They have it exactly backwards. And the philosophy that's conveyed in the schools, whether it's subtle or overt, has driven a wedge between parents and their children. And Chesterton saw this happening. In fact, commenting on the growing lawlessness in society, Chesterton says, "A magistrate recently remarked that this new lawlessness was due to the loss of parental control. And I think it reasonable, whether the magistrate thought so or not, to say that the loss of parental control is in turn due to the increase of official control. And this is surely the more natural because it is an increase of official control over parents. This is especially true to the eclipse of the father by the schoolmaster." Chesterton says that never in all of human history has the state had so much power as when it created and took over the educational system. It's just unprecedented in all of history. He said the state had less power over a man when it could send him to be burnt at the stake than it does now when it sends him to the public school. Because we are taking our children at the most formative time in their lives and we're putting them in control of the state that does not know what truth is. It's a fundamental shift in our civilization, and we don't even think about it anymore. We think of it as being normal. But something fundamental in our society has been undermined, and that fundamental thing is the family. Chesterton says, "There are 2 human relations which modern rulers are everywhere disposed to resolve, and they are the only 2 relations which ordinary people are so naturally constituted as to desire. A man can desire a woman as a thing of beauty, or a woman can desire a baby as a thing of beauty. These 2 relations, that of a man and wife and that of a mother and child, are the only 2 recognized combinations founded on this natural satisfaction of the thing itself, and these are also the only 2 recognized combinations in capitalist civilization which that system has set out to destroy. It's essential to note that no other relation is really being attacked." Okay, you weren't expecting that. Chesterton sees prophetically that these 2 natural things are under attack in our society, these 2 primary relations, the relationship between a husband and wife and the relationship between a mother and child. Divorce, contraception, abortion, same-sex marriage, all of these things are attacks on those 2 relations. husband and wife, mother and child. Chesterton sees it happen. But it's a surprise. He says that they're being destroyed by our capitalist civilization. He doesn't say socialist civilization. Capitalist? Yes, because that is the system that first separated the man from his wife and family by making him a wage earner, and then separated the mother from the home by making her a wage earner, so that they both work for someone else. They don't work for themselves, and it wasn't the socialist state that did this. It was industrial capitalism. Capitalism does not care about marriage. It doesn't care about families. It cares about the economic usefulness of individuals, first as employees and then as consumers. And so, with the breakup of the family, what do you get? You get socialism. Chesterton says that no one ever talks about what is the alternative to the family. He says the alternative to the family is the state. And the state rises to power when the family falls apart. But it was capitalism that broke up the family. And then the state comes in to fill that void and fill the functions of the family. Chesterton says the alternative to the family is the state, and he says it's the result of mere sex emancipation will be an increased bureaucracy. We're going to see the growth of bureaucracy, the likes of which we could never imagine in the wake of what's going on with same-sex marriage. It's going to mean governmental control of just about everything we say and do. Chesterton certainly doesn't trust the state as the alternative to the family. He certainly doesn't trust, he says, that the sort of men who make our laws could be trusted to unmake our marriages. But it's a point that a free and stable society is only possible with strong families. If the families fall apart, the society falls apart. But in order to have strong families, you have to have a political system that's based on the family and an economic system that's based on the family. Which, of course, brings us to the second question that I'm always asked. That question about economics, that question about distributism. And I'm going to answer that question the way I answer any question. I'm going to quote Chesterton. And most of you have never heard these quotes before. They're all from the New Witness, one of the papers that Chesterton wrote for, that his brother founded, and that led to GK's Weekly. So these are all from the early 1920s, late 19-teens. He says nobody really understands what distributism is until he understands what it is not, as that it is not communism and it is not capitalism. But even this will be useless if he does not understand what communism and capitalism really are. Socialism, and by extension communism, is full of the idea that an ordinary person is incompetent and must be superseded by an official, who is also an ordinary person. Their whole philosophy is that a thing must not be done by somebody, but by somebody else. It is vain to urge us to avoid the blunder of communism if we don't have the courage to confess the colossal blunder of capitalism. Capitalism also was only a recently new thing and has grown no better for becoming an old thing. For things are not new or old, they are only good or evil. The last corruption of commercialism, which is called capitalism, comes when the shopkeepers have lost their shops, just as the yeomen have lost their farms. Under capitalism, few men can be keepers of shops or keepers of anything in the true sense, for they are not given anything to keep. The rich only lend them houses and tools and land to use, just as the rich only lend them money, and in all cases the effect is bankruptcy and servitude. They've become more and more men serving for a salary or the wage the few great shopkeepers who own the great shops. If the capitalist process is completed, we shall become a race of servants, with all the vices and what is almost worse, all the virtues of servants, smooth, orderly, supple, and superficial. I need not repeat for the 100th time that the case against communism is not a case for capitalism, and indeed the case against communism is that it is too much like capitalism. Capitalism and collectivism are not contrary things. It's clear every day that they are only two forms of the same thing. Nobody will get near it by using terms like socialist and individualist, which have become as rigidly unreal as terms like conservative and liberal. The public men and public organs are all tied together, are all tied either to the cause of big business or of the big bureaucracies, but very often to both, for they merge more and more into one another, and they also then control public expression. A socialist state cannot allow opposition, because a socialist state cannot allow anything. It is the whole point that it produces everything, possesses everything, and is directly responsible for everything. It has the means of production, distribution, and exchange, and if there's any shooting, material or moral, it produces the shots, distributes the shots, and arranges for the exchange of the shots. And its connection to commercial anarchy, state socialism, of which it was a reaction, the connection is that nobody ever wanted it at all. Distributism may be a dream, but it is not a sleep or a cause of sleep, like the word socialism. Distributism is conscious of the collapse of industrialism and the need to recover thrift and freedom. It's based on property. Property has two primary social functions. It is protective and it is creative. It is like Nehemiah rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem with a sword in one hand and a trowel in the other. The sword is the protective function. It provides security both against the vicissitudes of the market and the tyranny of the state. It gives a man private powers to protect him against the abuse of public powers. It also has a creative function. It builds, it produces, it makes things. And the thing it protects is the family, and the thing it creates is the family. It means people working for themselves, providing for themselves, ruling themselves, governing themselves. It means people being their own employers and their own employees. The opposite of unemployment is not employment. The opposite of unemployment is independence. Chesterton, the way I explain distributism is I say capitalism, which used to be called individualism, is based on the interests of the individual. Communism / socialism is based on the interests of the community. Distributism is based on the interests of the family. The family is recognized as the primary unit of society, not the individual, because individual rights will undermine family rights, not the community, because community rights can supersede too much the family rights. Now, anyone who's familiar with Chesterton at all knows that he does not fall into the simplistic left-right, liberal-conservative classification. In fact, there's a Chesterton quote that I quote every day. I can tell I'm just about to quote it right now. It's from Orthodoxy. He says, when a society breaks up, two things happen. The vices run wild and they do great damage. But he says the virtues also run wild. And the virtues do perhaps even more damage because they become separated from each other and are wandering alone. And the virtues actually end up fighting each other. Thus you'll have some people who care only about truth and other people who care only about pity. But the people who care only about truth, their truth is pitiless. And the people who care only about pity, their pity is untruthful. It's a very good explanation of the dichotomy of the right and the left. A truth that is pitiless and a pity that is untruthful. We have to have truth and we have to have love. We have to have them both, and we can't compromise either one. But he talks, as I said, in that passage about what happens when a society falls apart. And if you look at the passage again, he says what happened to make our society fall apart. What does he identify as the particular point in the history of Western civilization that started this chain of reactions that has led to where we are now? What? Someone said the Protestant Reformation. That was a really unecumenical thing to say. Now, we do have Protestants here in the room tonight. We even have some Catholics in the room. We have a lot of strange people in this room tonight. But that was the right answer. It was the Reformation. That's what Chesterton identifies. And the fact is, we know, based on our presence here tonight, that Chesterton is a model of ecumenism. He is the greatest ecumenical writer of the 20th century. Appeals to Catholics and non-Catholics alike. I know he's appealed to me both when I've been a non-Catholic and a Catholic. It is one of the dangers that he appeals to non-Catholics in such a way that they do become Catholic. It's truly one of the greatest dangers in reading Chesterton. And of course, in spite of this great appeal, he doesn't pull any punches when he talks about the Reformation. In fact, this is what he says. And this is probably also a quote you haven't heard. This is from the New Witness. I am firmly convinced that the Reformation of the 16th century was as near as any mortal thing can come to unmixed evil. Even the parts of it that might appear plausible and enlightened from a purely secular standpoint have turned out rotten and reactionary also from a purely secular standpoint. By substituting the Bible for the sacrament, it created a pedantic caste of those who could read, superstitiously identified with those who could think. By destroying the monks, it took social work from the poor philanthropists who chose to deny themselves and gave it to the rich philanthropists who chose to assert themselves. By preaching individualism while preserving inequality, it produced modern capitalism. It destroyed the only League of Nations that ever had a chance. It produced the worst wars of nations that ever existed. It produced the most efficient form of Protestantism, which is Prussia. And it is producing the worst part of paganism, which is slavery. I want to point out that Chesterton was not Catholic when he wrote that. And I also want to point out that to say that he blames our modern problems on the Reformation is not to say that he blames the Reformation on the Protestants. In his mystical poems about the Blessed Virgin Mary, he talks about the good men and the bad men in the Reformation. And he said the good men who were right to be wrong, and the bad men who had no right to their right, who had no right to their truth. But his point is that the break from the church was a break from the truth, and it began a series of errors. America has a lot of problems, and it was founded as a Protestant nation. And Protestantism isn't one thing, it's many things. But one thing that it does do is it keeps protesting. Protestants protest against other Protestants. It's a form of Christianity that keeps splitting up, and America has been a fertile ground for the birth of new Protestant sects. Chesterton says, there are individuals in all these creeds who have nothing the matter with them except their creeds. But he says, there does exist a group of new religions which have grown up, especially in America, which may not unfairly be classified as being essentially religions of pride. Being inspired by pride, they are naturally allied to prosperity. And so you have one kind of Protestant who falls into the temptation of pride and avarice, and another kind of Protestant who falls into the temptation of simply rebellion against the church. Chesterton says in Orthodoxy, men who begin to fight the church for the sake of freedom and humanity end by flinging away freedom and humanity if only they may fight the church. The secularists do not destroy religion, they destroy everything else. The Titans did not conquer heaven, but they laid waste the world. And this is what we've seen. As I say, America began as a Protestant nation. Its education system was a Protestant education system. But the nature of Protestantism is to continue to protest and to continue to reject authority for personal reasons, and it leads naturally to secularization. And as Chesterton said, as I quoted earlier, you cannot have a secular education. You can't have a secular education because it's not even an education. It does not teach the truth. On the contrary, it attacks the truth. It undermines the truth. And there's nothing worse. There's nothing worse than doing that to our children. The most soul-destroying places in our society today are the public schools. And ultimately, the most obvious and most effective solution to the education crisis is to take education out of the hands of the government. We always hear about the separation of church and state. What we really need is the separation of education and state. And the solution is not to take secular education and simply add a class on religion. The faith has to inform everything we teach. The system needs a complete overhaul. We can't make the current form of education Christian. We need a new system altogether based on the truth, and Christ is the truth. But just as education cannot be conducted without religion, neither can economics be conducted without religion. Our present economic system, is that me? It's a $25 fine, by the way. Did I mention that? It's a $25 fine, but it's tax deductible. All right. Our present economic system is based on a concentration of wealth, most of which is artificial because it's the trading of numbers and not even of actual goods. It's a giant Ponzi scheme designed to collapse, and it does collapse periodically. And it's built with the assumption that the government will bail it out. And it's a system dependent on millions of wage slaves who in turn are dependent on it. It's a system that measures itself by employment and unemployment, so that the unemployed think of themselves as having the right to be employed, and the employed think of only of their benefits and their retirement and being taken care of. and we expect to be fed by one industry and entertained by another. We're kept quiet by bread and circuses. The solution is not to take the present economic system and add a course on business ethics. The whole thing needs an overhaul. And we cannot make the present system Christian. We need a new system. We need to rebuild a Christian civilization. And we need to start making that argument. Chesterton says, when the art of controversy comes back, it will not come from a world of skeptics and iconoclasts. It will come rather from the world of believers and dogmatists. It will come out of a clash of real convictions, which are positive and not negative, not from those who say what is truth, but from those who can still say this is truth. Not from Pilate, but from Paul. The solution to our educational and our economic crisis is not going to be a top-down solution. It's not going to come from electing a different president or hiring a new CEO. It's going to come from the bottom up. Chesterton says we need an army of amateurs, for our country is now perishing of professionals. There's one thing that we do need from up top. We need God. We need a major religious revival to transform our society. Something at which future historians will look back and say that is the point when things turned around. And if we look at those moments in our own past, at the turning points in history, we'll always see that there was a popular movement that changed the direction that the society was going, and that there was always a great saint at the center of it. And I think we have such a saint. Someone who has the right philosophy, the philosophy of St. Thomas Aquinas, someone who has the right spirit, the spirit of St. Francis of Assisi, someone who has the right vision of the modern world, the same that Leo XIII has, but someone who's a layman. For as the Second Vatican Council clearly and rightly understood, it's the laity that will play a fundamental role in bringing the gospel to the modern world. We need a saint who represents the family because he's devoted to the Holy Family. He understands the purity and obedience and the humility of the Mother of God. But he also understands the craftsmanship and the honesty and the leadership of Joseph, and understands that every baby is a gift from God, like the Christ child. Someone who's a model thinker, but also a model of hope and joy. We don't need a mere prophet preaching doom and destruction. We need a beacon of light. In these, the new dark ages, that's the kind of saint we need. And that's the kind of saint I think we already have. And I'm speaking, of course, of GK Chesterton. But someone will say, well, we don't have GK Chesterton. He's dead. He's dead, Dale. He's not here anymore. And that would be to miss the point. First of all, he is here. We have everything he wrote. We have his words, which are very present, his words which are just as pertinent and profound as ever, perhaps even more now than when he wrote them. We have his words just as we have the words of St. Thomas Aquinas. And if Chesterton is a saint, he's more than here. If he's a saint, it means we also have the power of his intercession, because he's in the presence of God. But someone will say, well, but he's not a saint, Dale. The church hasn't made him a saint. Which brings me to the third question that I'm always asked when I give a talk on Chesterton. Dale, what's going on with the cause for Chesterton's canonization? Well, as many of you may know, it's something we've been working on for a long time. And I have something to report. My counterpart in England is Martin Thompson, who's been fighting the good fight over there in Chesterton's homeland, where the prophet is without honor in his own country. And he runs a very active Chesterton society there. And he and I together had the initial meeting with the Bishop of Northampton. And Aidan Mackey sat in on that meeting, and that was 11 years ago. And since that time, a different bishop came in. That Bishop of Northampton at that time was very sympathetic, but started to do a little work, but then he got kicked upstairs to be archbishop in a different archdiocese. A new bishop came in, Bishop Peter Doyle, and just honestly admitted he didn't know anything about Chesterton. I had annual correspondence with him, and he was always gracious to me, but he said things like, well, there's no evidence of a local cult. And the local Chestertonians in England, they took some offense at that. And Martin Thompson had a meeting with the bishop about a year ago. And with him was his father, Martin Thompson's father, who was the senior deacon in the diocese, and very old, and really really in a state of decline. But his father simply said to the bishop, "We need Chesterton's holiness." And the bishop said, "What do you want me to do?" And Martin said, "I don't know." Now, I love Martin. I wish he hadn't said that, but because I gave him a very clear instruction of how these are the exact things that he has to do. But the Holy Spirit was moving because it wasn't the time. Things have been heating up as of late, and Martin just had another audience with the bishop just a few weeks ago, and he said to the bishop, "My lord," this is what you call bishops in England, "my lord, this is not going to go away. We're getting inquiries from all over. Dale Alhquist keeps getting inquiries in America. I'm getting inquiries, including this one here." And he handed the bishop a letter. And the letter was from an Argentine ambassador. And he'd written to Martin saying, "What's going on with Chesterton's cause? There's a great devotion to Chesterton here in Argentina. As you may know, Cardinal Jorge Bergoglio was the honorary chairman of our Chesterton conference here." And the bishop read those words. And realized, yes, this is not going to go away. And he said, Martin Thompson says, this is what you can quote, Dale. "Bishop Peter Doyle has given me permission to report that the Bishop of Northampton is sympathetic to our wishes and is seeking a suitable cleric to begin an investigation into the potential for opening the cause of GK Chesterton." Oh, thank you. It's the first official step. The investigation, of course, we hope would lead to the next step, which is the determination and designation of Chesterton as a servant of God. Then the real work begins. The rigorous evaluation of Chesterton's life and writings, which we hope would lead the church to declare Chesterton as venerable. And then, as the saying goes, the next boat is from heaven. It would be a miracle due to Chesterton's intercession, or ascribed to Chesterton's intercession, that would lead to beatification. And then another miracle would mean St. Gilbert Keith Chesterton. And just to make things more interesting and more complicated, we think there's also a cause for and a case for heroic virtue and holiness in the woman who stood at Chesterton's side, Frances. As I say, it's the first official step. The bishop's looking to appoint a cleric to begin this investigation into Chesterton's holiness, but the unofficial steps have already been taken, and we can continue to take the unofficial steps. The widespread popular devotion that yields saints. We have, first of all, the duty of spreading and popularizing Chesterton's words and wisdom. We have the duty to spread his hope and his joy. We have the inspiration to break the conventions and keep the commandments, and the inspiration to follow Chesterton's example in bringing both truth and charity in all our conversations and controversies to the world, to ridicule the ridiculous things such as Hudge and Gudge, but to rescue the forgotten and the cast-off things, beauty and tradition and the poor. But we also have an opportunity to ask for Chesterton's intercession. And we have these prayer cards. And we have them downstairs at the table. Everybody take one, start putting it to use. We've already had some amazing stories coming off of people who have said this prayer. We are not a club. That is, we're not exclusive, where outsiders are not welcome. Everyone's always welcome to join the American Chesterton Society, to participate in our activities, to write for our publications, speak at our conferences, to contribute to the growing field of scholarship around Chesterton's writings. But by actively pursuing Chesterton's cause for beatification, we're obviously going to go beyond simply studying Chesterton as a writer. And in one sense, we've always done this. We've always gone beyond that. But in some people's minds, the nature of our organization is going to be changing as a result of really actively pursuing Chesterton's cause. And it may turn some people off. But if Chesterton is a saint, that's the most important thing about him. Because saints make other saints. And our goal is to bring souls to Christ. And when I say we're not a club, it also means that we're not a club in that we don't use Chesterton to hit people over the head. We don't want to send people away. We believe that Chesterton is a saint and saints are attractive. And we also believe Chesterton's a prophet. And obviously many people don't want to hear what prophets have to say, but as Chesterton says, the best kind of prophecy is to say not what will occur, but what should occur. And we're part of a movement to change the world. And it's good that we should feel good about what we're doing. But we have to be careful not to praise ourselves, because that's the weakness of any movement. Chesterton warns that in order to succeed, we must do it by criticizing ourselves. At the conclusion of The Everlasting Man, Chesterton talks about what it is that puzzles the world about the Catholic Church. And it's that its members still behave as if they are messengers. And in the end, he says there are only two kinds of people in the world: those who are bringing the message and those who have not yet heard it or cannot believe it. We have a message. It's one of great joy and hope, and it's a privilege to be part of it with you.